Chandran, and I'll be chairing today's session at Politics in the Pub. Today's topic is update on Cuba. Now, to speak on this topic, we have two wonderful speakers, Dr. Tim Anderson and Maria Filario. Now, Maria is from the Australia-Cuba Friendship Society, or ACFS in short. Now, the Australia-Cuba Friendship Society, it aims to promote and encourage friendship, understanding, trade, and other exchange between the people of Australia and the people of Cuba. They organize a variety of political and cultural events during the year, culminating in the annual Work-Study Brigade to Cuba. Every year they organize this here. This little thing, it tells you all. So that is, I'm told, is it the cheapest way to visit Cuba and most enjoyable way too, I'm sure. The priority of ACFS, Australia-Cuba Friendship Society, is to end the US blockade of Cuba. That is their priority. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tim and Maria the usual way.
My talk tonight is based on personal observation and experiences. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak tonight. Also grateful to Australia for allowing me to study civil engineering for free at TAFE many years ago. Why do I support Cuba Socialista? The main reasons are my poor peasant background, my experiences working with and helping homeless people in Sydney for around 9 years, and the great experience of visiting Cuba with the brigade in January this year. My interest in Cuba and its socialist revolution began when I was very young, working in the fields of Castilla along the side of my granddad, listening to his stories of the Spanish Civil War and how he never surrendered his ideas. My grandfather admired Fidel, and he heard on the Spanish radio daily news of the Cuban Revolution, and Fidel's men with long beards teaching poor Cuban peasants to read and write in conservative fascist Spain, where beards were the sign of demons. It used to make my granddad happy, and he often wished he was one of those peasants learning, and that Fidel's men would soon reach his poor village. In Spain, before the Second Republic in 1931, in rural areas, the literacy rate would have been more than 90% in my village. Between 1932 and 1933, in just 1 year of the left-wing government, they opened up about 3,000 public libraries in the rural areas. Also, they created the pedagogy nations, which group of university students teaching everyone in remote villages about the culture and the traditions, and the poor could learn. They took on board the classic idea of educating, having fun. Garcia Lorca was one of the university students initiators of the program La Barraca. But the program was short-lived. The fascists killed him in August 1936. His body has never been recovered, like those of 140,000 other victims of acid lying today in common burial graves on the side of the Spanish roads. This year, the work of the United Nations made recommendation. Spain is bound by the international law. Spain should investigate the human rights crimes during the Franco years, and it should give priority to implement 42 of the recommendations in regards to the victims. It has been nearly 18 years, and the families are still looking for justice, dignity, and reparation. Recently I listened to Christopher Payne, the Minister for Education, in July in one of the interviews speaking on the line program. He was talking about the cost of education, and someone asked him, why couldn't it be free education and healthcare in Australia. His answer was, "Do you think this is a paradise?" And I thought of Cuba. I always dream of visiting Cuba and seeing the work of the revolution. I did the same with Palestine. I wanted to see the situation on the ground and support the victims of abuse, denigration and criminal actions by some Israelis. I went to Cuba for the first time when my son was 12. And it was just after September 11, when no one wanted to fly and the prices were very low, so we could afford the trip. When I came back, I joined the Australia-Cuba Friendship Society. This was in 2002, and I have been supporting their activities since. My second visit was the one on the brigade in January this year. Last year, in the community sector work where I worked, the conditions were deteriorating. Now we lost our jobs. The managers were testing the workplace out. They started to force us to have holidays when they wished. No longer we could accumulate holidays or choose when we wanted to take them. And because I didn't enjoy winter in Spain, so I signed for the brigade. When I came back, they had threatened to sack me. And thanks to the union, there has been a mutual misunderstanding regarding my leave. I'm still working. Arriving in La Habana from the airport, this big billboard hit me. The Cuban blockade is the longest genocide. The Cubans have been living for 56 years behind this illegal, inhumane blockade imposed by the USA. The UN General Assembly in the last meeting in September 2030 adopted for the 22nd year the resolution calling for an end to the embargo against Cuba. The result in economic damages accumulated over half a century. The amount is up to $1 trillion. The vote in 2013 was 188 in favor, 2 against, United States and Israel, and 3 abstentions, the Marshall Islands and Federated States of Micronesia and Palau. This has to be the longest and most brutal blockade in history. They are trying to break a country by famine or illness. But what has happened? Yes, Cuba is suffering as a result of the economic blockade. It's not a rich country, but also millions of poor USA citizens. They are lost unemployed, with poor working conditions. They don't trust the judicial system. We saw daily demonstrations in Ferguson recently. Some people cannot afford to live, and with not access to health service, the capitalist system is not interested in them, the poor. Every year in the US, the number of people wanting to leave the blockade is growing. And now among the poor citizens are the US businesses. They want the blockade to be lifted because they are missing out on millions of dollars in contracts. The majority of the US population wants a change in Washington policies towards Cuba. But the US is under the influence of a reactionary and sectarian and powerful minority that defends aggression and wars and the markets. It does not represent the interest of their own people, only the markets and the big energy corporations. They have lost the credibility and influence in the world because of the double standards. They are also good at dividing the poor, creating fears and races, to send the poor to war so they can control the resources for the big captains of the industries and the markets. How can Cuba make advance in the face of the 56 years of bullying, isolation from the big powerful nation 90 miles north? It is because of the system of working together, hand in hand, in solidarity with in the adversity, they find solutions. On my trip, I was able to compare the two systems by looking at the plea of the most vulnerable in our society. And in Cuba, because I believe the way we treat the most vulnerable is a reflection of our very humanity. During the brigade, I asked many questions about the socialist system and what's happened to the homeless, the mentally unwell people, women with domestic violence, child abuse. These are the areas of my interest. You have to pay a visit to the areas where the most disadvantaged and unemployed live, and you can see that they have no service and very limited access to services they need. Community programs like women's refuges and many other services are being closed down due to funding caused by our conservative government. Just a few statistics about Cuba. Before the revolution in 1959, 50% of the population was illiterate. They had only 844 schools, 2,800 teachers, and around 19,000 students. In 1 year, from 1960 to 61, they created 15,000 new schools, and in the rural areas, they reduced the illiteracy rate to 3.9%, educating young, old, disabled people, including 25,000 people from Haiti who didn't even speak Spanish. The Cuban method, Yo Si Puedo, Yes I Can, has taught reading and writing to more than 6 million people in 29 countries, including Spain and Australia. There was a nice history in the Good Weekend recently by Chris Ray about the literacy program in Burke and Vulcania. In Spain, the Fundación Sevilla took on board the program, but the mainstream media, the TV, Spain's main TV, did not want to run the program after one of the smaller channels did. In Spain, they are ashamed that a rich country from Europe has to access a program created in a third world country. Cuba was emotional at times, remembering what my grandfather believes in his ideas of a fair system for peasants like him, especially when we visited farms, cooperatives in Havana. One of them had 170 members living in the community nearby. They had 230 different types of vegetables, legumes. Everything was organic, including pest control, microorganisms, and soil diversity. They have not used chemicals since 2000. The message was united we multiply your result, and the motto was to live with the land, not of the land. We also visited a cooperative of agricultural production near Julio Antonio Melia camp. We were told why these cooperatives are so important in their economy and efficiency as the way of creating local employment and utilizing the land for the production of food. The food production is either consumed by the members or sold in the markets around the local areas, and the excess is exported. Everyone gets the basic salary plus extra food, and if the worker has work overtime, he gets paid. All the workers are members of the cooperative, and the decisions are made in assembly. They mediate if the problems arise before they escalate. They use no transgenic seeds. They always promote local products rather than imported ones. It's a key to the survival of the local economy since the 2000s, and they are trying harder for their agricultural products to be organic. We learned about Cuban renewable energies since 1994, and today there are more than 500 medical centers in remote areas powered by solar systems, 2,300 schools, and 1,800 community television rooms. Cuba is now part of the ALBA, the CELAC, and the Treaty of the Commerce of the Peoples, el Tratado de Comercio de los Pueblos. The aim is to end poverty and social exclusion, end illiteracy, and support human rights, to improve the working conditions of women, to care for the environment, economic integration, and the formation of a grand national enterprise to create front to the transnationals. I would like now to return to the Cuban Five. 2 weeks ago, the daughter of one of the Cuban Five, Aileen Labañino, was in Sydney. I assume that most of you have heard about the Cuban 5. They were on a mission in Miami to monitor the actions of Miami-based terrorist groups in order to prevent those groups from carrying out attacks on the country, Cuba. They were arrested by the FBI and sentenced to long jail terms on trumped charges in Miami court. Miami is the home of the Cuban mafia. Meanwhile, the likes of Posada Carrillas, who boast about the criminal activities in the US TV, freely works the street of Miami. Everyone should know about the hypocrisy of the US system and why this is a political case. How can the USA go on defending criminals and at the same time imprison innocent people for preventing terrorist acts, supported by the USA? Governments that publicly they say to be preventing, but we all know they are the instigators in many countries like Syria and Libya. I met with some of the family members of the Cuban 5, the mothers of Rene and Antonio, Ramon's wife, Elizabeth Palmeiro, and Gerardo's niece. It was a very moving experience to listen the way they have been punished in the halls for months, the mistreatment that they have to endure, and the sorrow of the families unable to visit them many times. It is time to put an end to this unjust cause of the Cuban 5. Cubans need to be back at home with their families. I met Dalia from the Federation of Cuban Women when on the brigade. It's a grassroots women organization with programs and policies that aims to achieve equal rights and full emancipation in all the aspects of levels of the Cuban society. Cuba is the fourth in the world for women represented in parliament, 43.2, ahead of countries like Norway and Finland. 65% of university graduates are women. 46% of the workforce are women. 66% personal techniques and professional are women. 48% of scientists researchers are women. And 52% of international mission and of cooperation are women. I was able to learn about over 54 years of grassroots work in the Federation of Cuban Women. Currently, they have 4 million of women in this organization. Girls over 40 years of age, they can join in. Programs like the coordination of employment to improve female participation in the workplace and to prevent discrimination in contrast. Women advocacy centers, they call it Casas de Orientación, provide a range of services, including access to social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, educational experts, to help with different problems like domestic violence, interfamily violence, alcohol issues. They provide help to people affected by divorce, counseling for children or old people. They have weekly publications. It's called Mujeres, but with its aim is not to provide a sexist image of the women, but more to do with information and documentation. They coordinate educational programs directed to children and parents. It was interesting to compare the programs and the progress with my experience and compare my experience in Australia. I work with abusive homeless women and children. I often complain about the lack of services like refuges for women and children experiencing domestic violence and more affordable houses for low-income people to rent. The Women's Advocacy Center coordinates in Cuba around 82,000 social workers, 78,000 health professionals who work on barriers to prevent disease like dengue, HIV/AIDS. They also provide advice and support to thousands of people going through the legal service dealing with the family courts. Cuba is a poor country. The blockade has taken a huge toll on the country, but the people have the essentials in life. To conclude, There are many things that we can learn from Cuba Socialista: the free health and educational system, the way towards food efficiency and organic production with no transgenics, food community gardens in city parks, the practical use of renewable energy for public buildings, and the solidarity with the peoples of the world rather than war, and the work of the Women's Federation. It is very important to keep the pressure on to lift the economic blockade in Cuba, to demand the removal of Cuba from the US list of terrorist nations, also to apply pressure to President Obama to release the Cuban Five, the last three in jails, Antonio, Gerardo, and Ramon, and that Guantanamo Bay be returned to Cuba, and that the prisoners held there be given a proper trial or be released. I will end up with a few words from the Cuban national hero, Jose Marti. He said, "To be educated is the only way to be free." This I hold very close to my life. Without my little education, I wouldn't be here today. Viva Cuba, and long live Cuba Socialista.
Wow.